Welcome to another PL Together Lounge Talk. I'm Adam Geller, founder and CEO of Edthena, the video coaching platform. Today, we're joined by Heather Hill. She is a researcher at Harvard University and a math instruction expert. And if you've not heard of her before, you've probably heard of some of her work, for example, the MQI framework, which we'll be talking about today. Heather, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. It's delightful to be here.
Well, let's start with some good news. There's a lot of chaos in the world. There's a lot of reasons to feel stressed, but there's also a lot of reasons to feel inspired and energized that we can, charge ahead, make the world a better place. So what's something that's kind of keeping you inspired when we think about what education is happening right now for kids and teachers?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So, I think obviously the first thing is that teachers are in classrooms despite all odds teaching kids. And that is really important to recognize that, it's a significant service to the country. So that's inspiring that people are going into classrooms and risking their health for, the benefits of kids and making sure that kids learn this year. The second thing I think is that, not all is lost during this year of instruction. So I think a lot of people were worried about remote schooling and about feeling like, well, you can't replicate good instruction. If you are virtual, you can't replicate good instruction if you're at a distance or if you're in hybrid models where you're not seeing kids very often. But in my experience, kind of hanging around my house where kids are taking classes, and my husband's actually a math teacher, and I've been sort of overhearing his math classes as well, you can actually, it's getting done. So I hear examples of really good instruction happening remotely with my kids sitting on Zoom, like many kids in this country are, and the teachers asking them the same kinds of challenging, interesting, rich mathematical questions, and that they would be in real classrooms. So that's been really a relief and terrific to hear.
Let's start our conversation today with something that you're very well known for, which is MQI. So that's mathematical quality of instruction. It is a framework focused on mathematics. So that's my layman's definition. Why don't you tell us, like, what is MQI, and why should we care that this thing is out there in the world?
All right. Well, so I'll tell you the story of the MQI. So maybe then you can tell me why you would care. So we were developing at Michigan with Deborah Ball an instrument called the Mathematical Knowledge for Teaching instrument. And it's an assessment of the specialized knowledge that teachers use when they're providing instruction to kids. So for instance, my mother has never been a teacher, and she wouldn't know if a kid shows up with an alternative way of doing division, she would have no way of responding to that child. Whereas if you're a teacher, you have to really be able to assess what the child is doing and respond appropriately about that method. Can the kid continue doing it? Is it more or less efficient than other methods for doing division, and so on and so forth. So we were developing this instrument, and we were going to do a validation study and wanted to actually see whether teachers who scored better on this paper and pencil knowledge assessment also taught differently in classrooms. And so we collected all this video, and all of a sudden we have like about 100 videos, and we were sitting on the videos and we were like, so what do we do with the video? There was no you had to sort of have a way to quantify what was going on in classrooms in order to be able to correlate it with the knowledge assessment scores. So we sat down and we actually started watching video. So the instrument itself is based off of video of US classroom instruction. We had some really terrific teachers in the sample, and we were able to build an instrument that reflects not only what was going on in US classrooms, but really reflects sort of the best case scenario in terms of what math educators were saying should happen in classrooms. So we'd all, had background in mathematics education research, and we're able to build this instrument that really is grown from practice, but also reflects some of the best practices that you see in things like standards, state standards, and teaching standards, and so on and so forth.
When I hear you talking about MQI, I think what sounds different to me in the way that often we educators talk about the idea of frameworks or rubrics or standards, or whatever word you want to use, is oftentimes those documents sound like a document, right? It sounds like maybe they were built in a back room or by head scratching to make sure we got the best ideas articulated. And
Mhm.
what I'm hearing that's, feels, so interesting about this is that it actually started from kind of the observational standpoint of like, well, what are we actually seeing so
Right.
that if we codified it, we could see more of it.
Exactly. So one of the things that we immediately saw as differences between the teachers in this initial sample were the ways that they heard, processed, and responded to kids' mathematical ideas. And we embedded that in the instrument, and it's since become an area of focus for a lot of researchers. This idea that it's not enough to ask questions, like we have, or assign cognitively demanding tasks. We have parts of the instrument that cover those things, but the real expertise in teaching is in how teachers sort of take in what kids are doing and then are able to build on those kids' ideas and involve kids in the mathematical reasoning of the lesson. So that's exactly right, Adam. It's built from practice, but it's built into it has been built some of the best practices in mathematics education.
One of the features that well, I don't want to assume you would say is important about the MQI, but um, sticks out to me. When I look at it and think about what it represents, is it's not just um, about the teacher action or what the teacher's doing, and it's not just about what you see the students doing. There's a piece to it that's about the interaction between the teacher and the student, in so much that it almost asks the question: do the teachers understand whether or not the students understand? Can you kind of lead us through some of that thinking?
Yeah, so there's definitely a component that this goes back to what I was saying earlier. So one of the differentiators between teachers or between teaching that we saw was teachers who could follow what kids were saying, but also follow in a really expert kind of way. So knowing like, okay, this kid is going down this path of mathematical thought. So there's this element of the math being present as well. So, this kid is going down this pathway of mathematical thought. So for a proportional reasoning problem, for instance, a kid might go down more of a additive way of thinking about it. And so the expert teachers would say, like, I know where this kid is going and I've seen it before. And here's what I'm going to do to sort of set up a situation that will help that kid realize that this is not the way to think about this particular problem. So, like I started off talking about, sometimes you see moments like that and you're like, wow, that was just genius. Like the teacher was able to stay 2 steps ahead of the kids and really help the kids realize or help the kids change the way what they were thinking about a math problem.
One of the other things that is I think you call them the domains in the framework is this question of errors and imprecision. And I'm wondering if that has particular importance in a world where maybe, unlike in an in-classroom setting, there's less opportunity for rich dialogue, or maybe instruction is even happening asynchronously. So how should we be thinking about attending to this question of
Right.
precision in teaching math in a COVID era?
Well, so I mean, to back up a little bit, this is a dimension that tries to make sure that the math that gets presented to kids is clear and correct. So some of the stuff that happens in classrooms is just like, sometimes a teacher endorses the wrong answer or does not or fails to explain something cleanly enough. Other times it's a little bit more subtle, like the teacher's language could be confusing for kids. Or the representation that they're using could be confusing for kids. So the main instrument actually captures to some degree that, and it's a way to feed back to teachers, and give teachers chances to think about, well, maybe I could be a little bit more prepared to give this explanation for what proportionality is or whatnot. In the online world, my thought immediately goes to some of the online resources that I've seen out there that are not so terrific. So, you watch videos or you get something off of Pinterest, and sometimes the way the math is described is not accurate. And if it is accurate, it may not be in alignment with the way that the video that you showed yesterday portrayed the math. It may not develop kids thinking in a sort of sequenced way that we know leads them down a path of sort of building mathematical knowledge. So that's my big concern. I think teachers are right to be looking for resources online, videos, online resources that can teach math, but I worry a lot about the quality of those things. I mean, even quality, like we were on Google one day for a project meeting, and we were looking up the definition of some geometric definition, and it was actually wrong on Google. Just, you like type it in and up pops the definition, and it was not correct. And the mathematician in the room flipped out and said, how can this be on Google? And so that's the kind of thing that I get kind of worried about in the current environment.
I think, what's interesting about that is you're giving a lot of credit to the math educators, and almost saying, don't discharge your duties to apply that level of rigor to the instruction that your students are going to receive if you are choosing these outside resources. That's an interesting way of thinking about this problem of precision, that like maybe the teachers might get pretty close to where things need to be, which means they need to apply that same that standard to resources they're picking. Heather, we need to wrap up this part of our conversation, but before we go, for those that are interested in learning more about MQI as a framework and also accessing free training resources, you can go to that aforementioned and slightly maligned search engine that she just mentioned, Google. That's the only one I've tested this in. But search for MQI framework, and that's going to take you to the resource page where you can learn more about the framework. And more importantly, you can see the videos that are part of the resources that help exemplify some of the skills that are mentioned in the framework. Heather, thanks so much for joining us for PL Together. If you're watching this or listening to this on some corner of the internet, make sure to head to pltogether.org for the rest of this conversation, as well as others. We'll be right back.